History is rarely written by the civilized. It is written by those who are hungry. In the 8th century, before the Common Era, the Italian peninsula was a patchwork of warring tribes and sophisticated Etruscan city-states. But on a swampy bend of the River Tiber, a group of outcasts, shepherds and refugees were carving a different kind of destiny. The legend tells us of Romulus and Remus, sons of Mars, suckled by a wolf. It is a violent myth for a violent people. But the archaeology tells a story of mud. The first Romans lived in circular huts of wattle and daub. They were farmers who carried swords. They didn't have the gold of the East or the philosophy of the Greeks. They had the mos maiorum, the way of the ancestors. This was a rigid, unforgiving code of discipline and duty. For 200 years, kings ruled Rome, but kings breed tyrants. In 509 BC, after the outrage of Lucretia, the Romans did something radical. They abolished the crown. They created the res publica, the public thing. This wasn't a democracy in the modern sense, but a complex machinery of checks and balances of consuls and senates. It was a government designed for a people who feared the power of a single man. This tension between the common people and the aristocrats would become the engine of Roman growth. They conquered their neighbors not because they loved war, but because they feared being conquered themselves. One by one, the hills of Italy fell to the red-shielded legions. Rome was no longer a village. It was a regional power staring across the sea at the great empire of Carthage. If the Republic was born in mud, it was forged in iron during the Punic Wars. For over a century, Rome locked horns with Carthage, the superpower of the Mediterranean. This was a total war. Rome lost hundreds of thousands of men. They saw Hannibal and his elephants at their very gates. But Rome had a terrifying quality. They refused to admit defeat. When a Roman fleet was destroyed, they simply built a bigger one. When an army was slaughtered, they drafted the teenagers and the elderly. By 146 BC, Carthage was salt and ash. Rome was now the undisputed master of the sea. But wealth is a double-edged sword. As the gold of conquered nations flooded the city, the old Roman virtues began to rot. The small farmers, the backbone of the army, were replaced by massive slave-run estates. The city grew into a sprawling, chaotic metropolis of nearly 1 million souls. Enter the age of the strong men. Men like Marius, Sulla, and eventually Gaius Julius Caesar. The Republic's machinery was breaking. Caesar didn't just cross the Rubicon, he crossed a line in history. He transformed the legion from a citizen militia into a private tool of power. When the daggers fell in the Senate on the Ides of March, they didn't just kill a man, they killed an idea. The Republic was dead. What came next would change the face of the earth forever. Augustus Caesar inherited a city of brick and a world of chaos. His solution was the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For 200 years, from the highlands of Scotland to the deserts of Parthia, a single law ruled. This was the era of the great building projects. Augustus famously boasted that he found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble. Think of the engineering. The Romans didn't just build, they conquered nature itself. They perfected concrete, a secret recipe of volcanic ash that allowed them to build massive domes like the Pantheon. They built 50,000 miles of paved roads designed so well that some are still in use today. They built aqueducts that used nothing but gravity to carry millions of gallons of fresh water into the city every day. This was the Rome of the Colosseum, a stadium so advanced it had elevators and a retractable roof. It was a city of spectacle where bread and circuses kept a restless population quiet. But underneath the marble was a cold reality. The empire was a giant extraction machine. It functioned only as long as it was expanding. By the time of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, the borders were beginning to groan. Plagues from the east and Germanic tribes from the north were tapping on the glass. The Golden Age was ending. In the 3rd century, the empire almost vanished. In a span of 50 years, there were over 26 different emperors. Most were murdered. The economy collapsed. Hyperinflation made Roman coins worthless. The world was fragmenting. It took the iron will of Diocletian to stitch it back together, but he had to cut the empire in half to save it. The center of gravity shifted east. Constantine, the first Christian emperor, built a new capital on the Bosphorus, Constantinople. Rome, the old mother, was being left behind. Christianity, once a forbidden sect in the catacombs, became the state religion. The old gods, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, were silenced. The very soul of the empire was being rewritten. The army was no longer composed of Italian farmers, but of Germanic mercenaries, the very barbarians the Romans had once despised. The line between Roman and Goth was blurring. The end didn't come with a bang, but with a whimper. In 410 AD, for the first time in 800 years, Rome was sacked by Alaric and his Visigoths. The psychological blow was total. St. Jerome wrote, "The whole world perished in one city." By 476 AD, when the last boy emperor Romulus Augustus was deposed by a Germanic general, most Romans barely noticed. The great aqueducts were failing. The marble was being stripped from temples to build crude walls. The empire in the west didn't disappear, it dissolved. It turned into the kingdoms of Europe. The Latin language turned into Italian, French, and Spanish. The Roman law became the foundation of the modern world. The empire was gone. But the ghost of Rome remained in every cathedral, every courthouse, and every road. We are still Romans. When you look at the dome of the US Capitol, you are looking at Rome. When you use a calendar, or read a book, or argue about the separation of powers, you are speaking the language of the Caesars. Rome is more than a place in Italy. It is a recurring dream of order, power, and beauty. From a mud village to a global titan, and finally to a ruins that haunt our imagination, Rome is the story of us. It is the story of what happens when human ambition meets the relentless march of time.